Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea announces plans to create a national cluster for bio-related data, putting the data together in one place to help the country fight future infectious diseases. Consumer inflation in South Korea comes in flat for June, with rising grocery prices offset by big declines in oil prices. It's expected to stay flat for the time being. And a nationwide sale is being broadcast online to boost consumption of locally made products. High-profile government officials are getting involved as hosts of the show. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. In just the first day since China's new national security law took effect in Hong Kong, local police have arrested hundreds of protesters. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is denouncing China, saying the law is an affront to all nations and promising to go ahead with scrapping Hong Kong's special status in trade. Ji-young has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Wednesday called Hong Kong just another communist-run city as he condemned China's new security law imposed on the territory.
Free Hong Kong was one of the world's most stable, prosperous, and dynamic cities. Now it will be just another communist-run city where its people will be subject to the party elite's whims. It's sad.
At a news briefing, he said the United States is deeply worried about the safety of everyone living in Hong Kong and warned that Washington would continue to implement President Trump's directive to seize the city's special status.
Article 38 of the new law also purports to apply to offenses committed outside of Hong Kong by non-residents of Hong Kong, and this likely includes Americans. This is outrageous and an affront to all nations.
His remarks came after Hong Kong police started making their first arrests for violating the Hong Kong national security law just a day after it came into force in Beijing. By Wednesday evening, at least 300 protesters were arrested for illegal assembly, obstruction, possession of weapons, and violating the new law. As part of the Trump administration's stricter stance against China, Pompeo also warned the U.S. is ready to impose economic and legal sanctions on firms that deal with China's western Xinjiang province.
Today, the United States Department of State, along with Treasury, Commerce, and DHS, are issuing a business advisory to companies with supply chain links to entities complicit in forced labor and other human rights abuses in Xinjiang and throughout China.
The U.S. sanctions are likely to punish senior Chinese officials who abuse human rights by forcibly detaining minority Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. Ji-young, Arirang News.
And the latest on the coronavirus, South Korea reported 54 new cases of COVID-19 on Thursday as cluster infections continue to pop up across the country. Of those, 44 cases were transmitted locally, 22 in the southwestern city of Gwangju, 15 in Seoul, and 10 in Gyeonggi-do province. Total cases nationwide now stand at 12,904. There were no additional deaths, meaning the death toll remains at 282. Nearly 20,000 people are currently being tested. Now, 1 year since Japan imposed restrictions on key exports to South Korea, Seoul's finance minister is urging Tokyo to be sincere in working to resolve the dispute over those measures. Speaking at an emergency economic meeting on Thursday, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi highlighted how South Korea has been making efforts to talk with Japan and at the same time is checked up on its own export control systems, which Japan had claimed were inadequate when it imposed the restrictions last year. The minister further highlighted that Seoul is made up for the cutoff of Japanese supplies by successfully localizing parts and materials and diversifying its suppliers. The government will soon announce plans to make South Korea an advanced manufacturing hub by stabilizing supply chains for materials and introducing advanced technology. Minister Hong also announced this morning that by next year, South Korea aims to create a national cluster of bio-related data encompassing new medicine and artificial intelligence. This will help the country tackle infectious diseases more efficiently in the future by putting all the data together. Currently, individual ministries are running 274 separate data platforms, but Minister Hong said the government will combine it all in the new platform, categorized into 14 sectors. Those will include material data on stem cells, brain research, microorganisms, and more. South Korea's consumer inflation was flat last month, rebounding from the negative price growth seen the month before. According to Statistics Korea, the consumer price index for June stood at 104.87, unchanged from the same month last year. The agency says the price of farm produce was up because of the government's payment of disaster relief funds, but that was canceled out by lower oil prices. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said last week that he expects consumer price inflation to stay near zero for the time being. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, thank you as always for coming on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
With the coronavirus still spreading fast, there are growing calls for more stimulus in some form in the U.S. and the U.K. Investors are reacting to that. What kind of stimulus is under discussion here?
U.S. and U.K. have both decided to implement more aggressive fiscal stimulus for increasing coronavirus infections and delayed economic recovery. Particularly in congressional hearing, the top two U.S. economic policymakers, Fed Chairman Powell and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, pledged to consider additional relief to prevent lasting damages to labor market and businesses. In UK, Bank of England signaled the possibility of negative key interest rate for the first time in history, and Prime Minister Johnson suggests expansionary fiscal policy packages that includes huge investment in IT and telecommunication investment infrastructure.
And it does seem like there could be another stimulus check on the way for Americans. But stocks on Wall Street were mixed overnight. The Dow was lower, but the S&P and the NASDAQ higher. The NASDAQ at a record high, in fact. On the one hand, there's the tensions with China. On the other hand, there's the possible stimulus. What's the story in the global markets?
Yesterday's U.S. market was mixed between Dow Jones Industrial and NASDAQ. Dow Jones Industrial decreased by 0.3%, but NASDAQ increased almost 1% in a single day. We can say that in U.S. market, positive factor of nearing coronavirus vaccine development and negative factor of infection increase and longer lockdowns are colliding. Meanwhile, European markets declined due to big employers like airline companies' large layoff announcements. But in today's market, Asian market had a big positive return in Tokyo, Shanghai, and Hong Kong altogether, because U.S. pharmaceutical company Pfizer is successful testing on vaccine development.
Yeah, you mentioned the Asian markets. There is a lot of uncertainty out there, but yet again, Korean stocks closed higher today, quite a bit higher. What happened in the local markets?
In today's market, Kospi and Kosdaq gained by 1.4% and 2.1% respectively, which was a great performance. And there was a strong purchase, particularly from domestic institutional investor, which is kind of different from previous days' situation. This rise was mostly affected by U.S. high-tech stocks' great performance in yesterday's market in the U.S.
Now, economically, in May, we see consumer inflation in Korea was negative, but in June, we see prices were unchanged from a year ago. Tell us why that might be and how you see the situation.
There was a negative inflation in May of this year, as we saw from previous report, at a negative 0.3%. This negative inflation or deflation is a gloomy signal of weakening demand for goods and services and therefore intensified recession. But inflation recovered positive level, actually 0% level, which is supposed to be affected by government's emergency cash out program. So we need to pay more attention how inflation changes in the next several months for avoiding a possible deflation and further recession of the economy.
Professor, Korea's exports last month were down more than 10% from a year earlier. This was several months in a row of declines in double digits. What kind of products are we talking about here?
Korea's export is rapidly declining very quickly. Actually, in June's export decreased by 11% compared to the same month in the last year. So that means Korean export declined over two-digit percentages in 3 straight months, starting from April of this year. But good news from this export is that export to the largest trading partner, China, begins to recover with 9.5% increase in June compared to the same month in the last year. So hopefully we can have a further boom of the Korean economy in the next month.
Indeed. All right, Professor Kim, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, investors in Korea rushed in today to buy the year's biggest IPO so far, SK Biopharmaceuticals, in anticipation of strength for the company in the pandemic. Shares of the company, a subsidiary of SK Group, soared by the daily limit of 30% right at the opening bell. It closed at 127,000 won. The IPO had been set at 49,000. At the closing bell, its market cap of 9.95 trillion won made it one of the 30 most valuable companies on the Kospi. It specializes in neurological disorders and has 2 original drugs approved by the U.S. FDA. South Korea is trying to get consumers spending again to revive the economy. There are discounts nationwide, but also this week, there's a live show being streamed online selling all kinds of things produced locally. And some of the hosts of the show are top government officials. Kim Sung-min reports.
Preparing the studio and getting the next item of clothing ready is hectic enough in a regular studio. But this show is being held at the KSPO Dome as part of the government's efforts to boost local consumption. And to show how important these shows are for the whole country are the special hosts, 7 government ministers. The ministers have been taking part in an e-commerce live stream from Wednesday, acting as hosts to help sell items related to their own ministries. The Minister of Oceans and Fisheries ate seaweed pickles on the show and praised their health benefits.
The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries will overcome the difficulties caused by COVID-19. Please buy our healthy marine products this summer.
Apart from seaweed pickles, many other products like clothes and detergent were on show.
We expect to see a 20% increase in sales. It has been difficult to find export routes since the COVID-19 outbreak, so we are very excited to receive this support from the government.
The event has been a success from the first day, as many products, including the seaweed pickles and the detergents, sold out during the show. The live stream is available on online platforms such as Naver and Tmon from 6 p.m. and runs until Friday, with viewers able to interact with the ministers while making purchases. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
People in South Korea are now able or will soon be able to enter some countries in Europe, but many remain closed to travelers from outside the continent. The Netherlands has adopted the European Council's recommendation for member states to reopen their borders to 14 countries, including South Korea. Switzerland, though not in the EU, will also lift restrictions on those countries starting July 20th. Italy is letting people in, but it's not adopting the guidelines and will continue to require visitors from outside Europe's Schengen area to quarantine for 14 days. Germany has lifted restrictions for 8 of the 14 recommended countries, but not for South Korea. The UN forecasts the pandemic could cost the global tourism industry revenues of up to $3.25 trillion, equivalent to 4.2% of the world's GDP. The UN Conference on Trade and Development said that in the most optimistic scenario, it would lose around $1.2 trillion. In absolute terms, the agency predicted that the U.S. and China will log the biggest shortfalls, followed by Thailand and European countries like France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the U.K. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.